I just wanted to share a little bit more about going to Gethsemane for the monastic interreligious dialogue last week with Venerable Tarpa. Some folks who attended were asked to give some presentations on the theme, which was monastic maturation in the Christian and Buddhist traditions. And it was kind of like, what do you see as a monastic that has helped you to progress along your path, either contemporary innovations or traditional rituals, rites, prayers, practice. And so there are 2, 4, 6, I think 6 of us that presented. And some of them were a little bit more academic, and some of them came from real-life story experiences of how they integrate their practices from their different traditions. So, and of course, being who I am, I tend to like to go to the personal stories on how people really take the practices and the rituals into their lives. So there were 3 in particular. Okay, so first there was a monk from, he was a Theravadan monk. His name is Reverend Kusala, and he lives in Los Angeles in Koreatown. And basically his life is police helicopters, sirens, gunshots, drugs, gangs, poverty, homelessness. Here's a little Dharma center that he's been in for 25 years in Koreatown. That's life. And that he used the Heart Sutra as sort of his little foundation on how things exist, how he existed in relationship to this life that he had been sent to by his teacher many, many years ago. And he has a wonderful storytelling, very transparent, just a remarkable person. So he had these 2 main identities, Kusala and Carl, who he was before he ordained, and all the permutations of these 2 identities and how they interrelate with each other on a daily life in relationship to all the stuff that's going on. So some days, Carl would rather just roll over in bed, read the paper, go down and have a burrito for breakfast and just call it a day. And then there were days where Reverend Kusala, who's this amazing practitioner who would get up and do his practice and basically benefit sentient beings from the time he gets up to the time he goes to bed at night. And sometimes Carl and Kusala will have some differences of opinions on what exactly was going to happen that day. And so he said all the identities that have formed since Carl became a monk, and it was just really quite funny. But what he said is that, Carl had basically gotten ordained wanting to practice to attain his own liberation. He wanted to become an arhat. He wanted self-liberation. He was tired of this crazy world. He was going to give up his motorcycle, shaved his mustache, gave away all his, gave up all his girlfriends. He was going to become an arhat. But what ended up happening when his teacher, who was, and once again, I don't know the details of which Theravada tradition he was in, he's in the center, and he said, the only problem about attaining self-liberation is that I kept picking up the phone. And every time I pick up the phone, it'd be like, hello, this is whatever Dharma said. Yes, this is the Los Angeles County Juvenile Center. We would really love for you to come down and speak to some of the kids about how to calm their minds and mindfulness and things like that. And then he'd just say, okay, so that was like 12 years ago. Then he'd say, well, I just kept picking up the phone. Hi, this is the LA police department, and we'd really like you. We have some domestic violence stuff going on in our area. We'd really love for you to go along with the police officer when he goes into these situations. Maybe your presence there would help sort of, okay, so 20 years later, so he keeps picking up the phone, and the things that this monk does and has been doing for 20, 25 years in the community college, juvenile center, high schools, grade schools, hospice, police force. And he said, I finally had to give up being an arhat. And I said, I guess I have to be a bodhisattva instead. So he ended up, I think, either Vietnamese or Korean tradition. So now he's going to become a bodhisattva. So the whole story was about, not that he had any problems about it, but he just kept saying, well, I keep picking up the phone, and I can't just say, I'm sorry, I want to become an arhat, leave me alone, I want to become liberated. He said, I have to, so a bodhisattva became really what I wanted to do. And that how his life in this community has really fed his practice in a very profound, deep way. I mean, and he's such a character. He's just one of the most amazing characters. And he's a big man with this beautiful, deep voice. And so anyways, so that's Reverend Kusala's sharing on practice. And then another one was in the afternoon, some of the monastics would share the chanting or the prayers, different more devotional aspects that they brought into their monastic life. And one of the afternoons, Reverend Heng Shur, who's in the Chinese Chan tradition, shared the beauty and the profundity of bowing. Now, he's not the monk, as far as my understanding, he's not the monk that the 3 Steps, 1 Bow book referred to, where there were these monks back in the 60s, I think late 60s, early 70s, who basically made 3 steps and prostrated all the way up the California coast. And they wrote a book about this incredible journey. Well, a few years later, when he was new in his monastic life, he decided to do the same thing. So he left LA with his Dharma protector, who's now Marty, a monk who's now Marty, who's also incredible all by himself, started prostrating from the temple in Los Angeles, 3 steps, 1 bow, all the way up to where their city of 10,000 Buddhas was being constructed, which is up in Ukiah. I think it took them almost 2.5 years to do this. And that how it profoundly affected him and transformed him. I mean, the county sheriffs became their best friends, keeping them on the side of the highway. The attention, and people bringing them food, because they basically ate what was offered. They had a car that Marty would put their sleeping things in, and they had a little bit of what you would call a comfort by having an old 1957 Chevy station wagon or something. I mean, it was very dated pictures that he had. But what he said is that this is one of the things that in all traditions and all cultures that it's used, whether you're Islam or whether you're Hindu, whether you're Christian, whether you're Buddhist, Western, Asian, bowing is a sign of respect, of gratitude, of welcoming, of saying goodbye, and that he really found it to be a transformative experience, and says that this is a universal gesture that we all use on whatever level of our understanding. He had, bowing on stage. We do bowing when we do performances. And I really enjoyed it. And he has a wonderful PowerPoint that has some of these old photographs of the actual experience of going up Highway 1, up the LA coast with the monks bowing and prostrating the whole way. And then the other one was one that was shared by some of the Catholic sisters. It's called Lectio Divina, which is taking an aspirational scripture, taking something in nature, taking art, taking music, taking world events, taking something personal that's happening in your life, and bringing it to mind, contemplating or chewing on it, seeing how your relationship to God would be influenced or changed or benefited by this event that you take into your mind very, very deeply. You do this in the beginning of the day, and then how are you going to enact the inspiration that you've gotten from contemplating this aspiration, whatever form it is, and that they've been using this. This is a very early Christian practice done by monastics from almost over 1,000 years ago, and that they still do this in the Catholic faith. And one of the young sisters that was there, who's a novice, says this is one of her main aspirational practices, and one of her practices to develop concentration and to really develop her love of God is to do this with usually current events. She finds that to be really quite provocative in getting her to think about how it relates to her. There's one of the steps is that you sit in stillness with this, and it can be for a day, it can be for a week, it could be for years, that you take this scripture, this icon, this article of nature that calls you forth in some sort of communion with God. And so it was really, it's kind of, they call it a heart movement, using these particular objects. So these are just 3 of the things that people shared during the week, from very personal sharings that I found really inspiring. I mean, I love transparency. I love when people share in their lives how their practice really affects them in kind of when the rubber hits the road kind of experience. And so these were just 3 of the 7 that were there, and I just wanted to share with you what touched me in the encounter.